Hello, Blue Jays fans, and welcome to episode 284, the Jays from the Couch radio podcast, brought to you, of course, by jaysfromthecouch.com. Glad you're tuning in for another week of Blue Jays talk. We've got a great episode for you. The one and only Shi Davidi will be joining me here momentarily. It's going to be a blast. We'll fire a whole bunch of everything you wanted to know about the Toronto Blue Jays right now during this lockout. I'm going to fire it at Shi, and we'll get his take on everything from the Rogers Center to trades to the lockout itself, a whole lot for you. Before I get there, though, I want to remind you to tune into this podcast every week. Typically, we stream on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern time, but when Shi Davidi says, can you do Sunday, I say absolutely. So we're coming to you at a new night, new time, for this week only, typically Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And if you miss this, don't worry, you can catch it in the archives on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, and the audio version available anywhere you find quality podcasts. I'm your host, as always, Shaun Doyle. You can follow me on Twitter at Doyle JFtC. Very excited for this week's episode. Of course, every episode I get excited for. I get a little giddy like a little child waiting to go live. But this week, we've got a great episode for you. And I think rather than go on and on and on, I will just bring in this week's guest. He is baseball insider, Sportsnet columnist, author of The Big 50, the Toronto Blue Jays, journalism instructor, and all-around hell of a guy, Shi Davidi. Thank you and welcome.
My pleasure, Shaun, and we appreciate the flexibility. Sorry about shifting it to Sunday instead of Monday, but tomorrow is the first day of the new semester at Santiago College, so it's gonna be a bit of a busy one for me.
Well, there you go, and down here in Nova Scotia, in God's country, I've got my first day of online learning tomorrow, so I'm sure I would not be able in the right headspace to do a podcast anyway. But Happy New Year to you.
You as well.
How's the lockout been treating you, Shi? Like, you must have more time on your hands, obviously. Have you been able to pick up any new hobbies or?
No. I mean, the lockout, it's interesting, right? Because it's been both sort of busy and not busy. There's still been some stuff to follow around. And obviously it was the news about the upcoming renovation of the Rogers Center is certainly a bit of a fun story to dive into. But I've had a chance to sort of dig into some things that that I've always wanted to, but sort of get lost in the daily churn. I've got a big read coming up. I'm not sure when that's going live, so I don't want to give details of that yet, but there's a big read that's coming up that, I was glad to be able to invest some time in. There's some other stories that I'm picking at. So, it's been a bit of an opportunity to examine some things that, sometimes get lost within the busyness of the day-to-day grind. But, the crunch time is coming up. There's everybody's going to start thinking about spring training soon, and with the lockout not moving towards resolution, not surprisingly, and sort of as expected.
Right.
That's going to shift in the next little while.
Well, fingers crossed, right? I mean, as much as we want it, and that we're here in January, everybody wants to start thinking about watching games in the sunshine in Florida and all that stuff. Hopefully we'll be able to get there. But before we talk about the lockout, Shi, I wanted to ask you about the renovations at Rogers Center, something in the neighborhood of $250 million. First of all, before we get there, does that necessarily mean that there's no new ballpark in the future of the Toronto Blue Jays?
No, I don't think it definitively closes the door on that in the medium to long term. But my sense is that, when this was sort of being explored, I would say 2018, 2019 into 2020. And at that point, there was maybe a little bit of momentum, but I don't know how far along the process it was. And then obviously the pandemic killed that. And I think what everybody had some time to digest things kind of came to the conclusion was that this was going to be a long process. This is sort of in the decade, 8 to 10 year range, as opposed to, something you can pull off in 3 to 4 years, 5 years. One person I spoke with, you figure that it might take, just several years just to get through the bureaucracy, because the land in the surrounding areas is controlled by each of the different levels of government here, different portions of land. So that part of it alone would have been difficult. And so once you start looking at that horizon and you understand that, look, the gap in revenue between the Blue Jays and their divisional rivals is only increasing, and even still, even if you started today, you'd have to build out an infrastructure. All that stuff takes time. That the best course of action was this sort of this medium term renovation, where you can sit back and decide, okay, well, is this really the best spot? Probably is, but is this where you're going to be able to do it? What are the opportunities elsewhere? Who do we need to be in charge of this? What type of infrastructure do we need? All those different pieces. So I think because of that, it's not necessarily a closed door, but it does for the short to medium term essentially close the door on that.
Right. And it kind of just puts it off to another day, and we've seen across baseball, you've got, Tampa Bay and Oakland especially, their whole ballpark situation. So I think we have examples across baseball of where this is not a very quick process.
Well, I mean, for different reasons in those
Sure.
places for sure. But, I think for the Blue Jays, like they sort of have the best site for them right now.
Yeah.
Sort of like everything that you'd want to do to it, like in and around it, to make it the modern experience where you're having some, a stadium anchored property development in and around that. That part of it is super complicated because you're talking, and there's a desire on the city's part to make something with that rail deck park idea that's been floating around forever. Then if you push it back, maybe you could build the shell of a stadium concurrently while you tear down the Rogers Center right only at the very end, so you don't disrupt the season. There are ways to do it, but there's just so much that goes into it that trying to do it in a reasonable time frame just sort of isn't going to work.
Right. And maybe, just looking into your crystal ball, do we get natural grass? No. I think that's never. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, right now in this setup, like the way that it's been described to me is that natural grass would cost, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions. You're getting zero essentially return on that. It's aside from it looking nice. Plus, there's the challenge of keeping it growing with a roof. And we've started to see some stadiums in different locales with roofs, like Texas, Arizona, Miami, shift back to artificial turf after trying to have some real turf, or natural grass. So I think for those reasons, I mean, there's no drainage. You'd have to put in drainage. Yeah. It's never been done before. I think it's just too much of an ordeal to pull off.
And as you said, not really worth the investment.
Right.
So once all of these renovations are done, my real question, what I really want to know is, does that mean Toronto will finally get another All-Star game?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's sort of been the prerequisite of late, right? Where Rob Manfred, the commissioner, uses the All-Star game as a reward for teams who have gotten new stadiums built or have gone through significant renovations of their stadiums. So the sense that I've gotten, and I haven't asked about this in a few years, kind of waiting for, the pandemic, one reason, but also because, knowing that they were going to go hand in hand, is that I think once the Blue Jays do have that renovated stadium, that at that point they would be in the running for an All-Star game.
Right. It just feels like it's been, 800 years since we've seen an All-Star game in Toronto.
Yeah.
So let's turn our attention to the lockout. Is there any positivity? Because I think the general census around the world, talking to everybody, is that these two sides, there's no trust. There's a lot of animosity built up over years, and rightly or wrongly, that seems to be the impression. And I keep seeing things, that say they'll meet sometime soon, and whether that's, negotiation, gamesmanship, or whatever have you. I guess really, is there anything concrete that we can say, okay, this is a good sign?
Well, I mean, the fact that they're going to have meetings and that Major League Baseball is working on a proposal to bring to the players, I suppose that thing, that fact is a positive. But what I've tried to do in this round is to really not get lost in the rhetoric and the public positioning of both sides. Because look, ultimately, you can talk about trust and lack of trust and this and that. Even if there's trust, it doesn't mean that you're not going to negotiate hard and you're not going to have conflict with the other side. Because each of the side, look, the players are trying to get more money and the owners are trying to give the players less. That's going to inherently create some conflict. And, I think that there is a bit more motivation on the player side this time where, they feel that over the past few CBAs, the owners have managed to, implement a handful of measures, a little bit each time, which when put together over the long term have worked to restrict salaries and bring down the proportion of revenue that's going to players. And look, from some of the public information that has been out there, and we don't know the full extent because nobody has a full picture of the team owners books, including the Players Association. But there are a lot of indicators that players have been getting less and less of the pie over the past 5, 7, 8, 9 years. And so that's led to a little bit more motivation on the player side. I do think there is a justifiable concern about what tanking and the incentivizing of losing has done to the game, to the sport. And in combination with revenue sharing that essentially subsidizes that for teams and means that you can probably break even without having to draw very much for within your own city. That's not a good situation for the game where you have a significant portion of teams every year who are punting on the season. So I do think there's some justifiable issues. But ultimately, look, the owners have no business without the players. The players have no jobs without the owners. They're going to go at each other. And then when the sides decide that they both can't bear any more pain, they're going to get to an agreement. And so, all the other stuff is just sort of background noise and, posturing for public opinion. The reality is this is how the CBA process works, how the negotiation process works. And, sometimes it's not pretty watching the sausage get made.
No, absolutely not. And I think that for me anyway, I'm kind of with you, tuning out the rhetoric, as you said. But when you think about it, like we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's no way that either side is going to want to eat into that, right? So, the lockout on December 1st really doesn't mean a whole lot when, given it's an off season and doing an off season deal doesn't take really that much time to do in the scope of month-long off season, right? So
Right.
that's why for me it's like, they'll get it done because nobody wants to lose money. Shai, we've got a question here from Butch Stevens, and a shout out to Butch because Butch watches our show religiously, and a shout out to the crew at the North Tonawanda Bar in upstate New York. As a Bison season ticket holder, please tell me the Blue Jays will play the whole season in Toronto and his Bisons won't get shipped out of town again.
Well, Butch, the Blue Jays owe your Bisons a significant debt of gratitude for all that they've done for them over the past couple of seasons. And, the Rich family and all the staff there in Buffalo have been tremendous for the Blue Jays and have really bent over backwards and do deserve a lot of kudos. I would love to tell you with 100% certainty that that's not going to happen. But as we are currently in, partial lockdown here in Ontario and the country in the throes of the Omicron wave, anyone who can tell you exactly what's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 months, I would love your crystal ball. So, I would think the fact that, the NHL teams are still able to travel back and forth across the border right now and the NBA teams as well is a pretty good harbinger for the Blue Jays being able to host their games here this summer. I think that's obviously a bit of a precedent. but to guarantee anything, there aren't there in these days are definitely no guarantees. So I would say it very much looks that way, but again, who knows for sure.
Right. And thanks to Butch for the question, watching on YouTube. And we're sitting here with Shi Davidi of Sportsnet Baseball Insider. So if you have your questions, send them on in. We'll throw them up here, throw Shi some curveballs, as it were. So let's say the lockout ends and, there's a few weeks left before spring training and all of that. So, I mean, I guess really what we're talking about is it ends tomorrow. Given that we're in almost the middle of January here. Do you see a rush of deals, either free agency or trades, coming when it ends? And maybe even more specifically from a Blue Jays perspective, what do you see happening post lockout?
Well, the conversations that I've had about sort of what this looks like, the sort of expectation is, there seems to be a lot of fatalism around, at least the people I'm talking to, that, this is going to get, going to need a really hard deadline where, the games, regular season games are threatened, or, that they have to get it done in order to get ready for opening day. So essentially what the expectation is to be a deal, to be like a breakneck, say 10-day signing period, the amount of time for players to get ready to go to camp and things of that nature, maybe 2 weeks. And then it'll just be a total frenzy once it reopens. And so I think there'll be a slew of deals, not just for the Blue Jays, but for everybody. Like we know that the Blue Jays still have some work to do, right? They still want an infielder. They still like to get another starter. They'd still like to get some help for the bullpen. I'd heard, I don't know how much validity there is to this, but that they were, there was a chance that they were going to get something done just before the lockout ended. Obviously that never happened. And, if something is done and if something is done, it's going to be announced right away, that hasn't leaked out yet. But I think the Blue Jays have a pretty good sense of where they're going to go. Obviously, every team has had an opportunity to sort of decompress in recent weeks and sort of, just create new plans. Say, okay, this is what we know. These are our opportunities. How do we prioritize what we do once we get the word go? And so I think the Blue Jays end up attacking in that way. They're going to know what they want, what their best opportunities are, which free agent players are seriously interested in them, and which teams they have a legitimate chance of making a deal with. And, I think that they're going to get some stuff done. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of sort of minor league free agents or minor league deals sort of just, filter in throughout the spring, just as business gets done and everybody catches up, and maybe the Blue Jays fill out some of their bullpen needs in that way as well.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that this morning, reading the piece by Gregor Chisholm just about the bullpen itself, and I'm wondering actually if it's just the minor league route, minor league deals type fillers. So I guess maybe an extension of that then, Shi, is, do you think that what's more likely? Because I know you can't predict the future, given that you've already asked for a crystal ball this episode. So which is more likely? Do you feel like they would spend money or prospect capital to round out for the infielder or the starter?
So I don't think it's necessarily sort of like one or the other. I think it'll depend on sort of where the best opportunity is. Look, I'm sure that they've been thinking about Jose Ramirez for a long time and sort of following up on what Cleveland's plans are with him. Cleveland, they're definitely listening. They're always listening. And this is sort of the timing where, if they're going to max out on Ramirez, this might be the opportunity.
Yeah.
And so, I think the Blue Jays probably look at that one last time, if that price is going to be in their wheelhouse, and maybe they pull that off. And, if it's not, then they start circling to plans B and C and going that way. And I can see a scenario where, they may look at, a higher end reliever too. I think what the Blue Jays are going to be looking for is where are they going to get the maximum amount of impact, the best and greatest improvement to their roster. And what we've seen throughout is that the Blue Jays don't lock themselves into sort of, we need this specific position, except for a starter, obviously. But like, I think the way they are now, they're a really good team. They project really well. And you're sort of like, where are you going to get the best bang for your buck? And if it happens to be, reliever, if it happens to be a fifth starter, if it's a third baseman or a second baseman or utility man or whatever, a left-handed hitting outfielder, maybe, I think that's the route that they take, and then sort of just make the pieces fit afterwards.
So in that vein, then, do you see a scenario where Santiago Espinal is the everyday third baseman for the Toronto Blue Jays in 2022?
I mean, I don't know if I'd necessarily say every day, but maybe he's sort of carrying a bit of a platoon. A lot of that will depend, right? The conversations that I've had, like the Blue Jays haven't shut the door on Biggio playing some third base as well. If they maybe get a really high end second baseman, and maybe it's a partnership there, or maybe or maybe Biggio does end up at second primarily, or Biggio's bouncing all around all the place because they've had some other needs. But I think with the Blue Jays in general, the way they approach team building is just throw as much talent into the mix, sort of essentially kind of get as many puzzle pieces as you can get, and then just figure out how they're going to fit after the fact. So instead of starting to kind of fit pieces to a specific picture that you have in your mind, it's just get all the best pieces that you can, and then make it work afterwards. And so I think because of that, the Blue Jays can construct their team in a few different ways. There's obviously the ideal. I think they clearly would love to get a left-handed impact bat or a impact switch hitter. That's something that they've talked about and really feel that they need. But there are some creative ways to get more left-handed too, and maybe it's a part-time left-handed hitter that splits time at third with Espinal, and part-time left-handed hitting outfield that shares some time in the outfield, and you've got Biggio playing a bit more at second base, and suddenly you've got a bit more balance. So there are a few ways for them to sort of go about that, and I think Espinal is going to be a part of this mix, and an important part of this mix. But I'm not sure that they're ready to give him everyday at bats just yet.
Fair enough. Now, well then, since you mentioned, I'm going to just throw the crazy at you here. Freddie Freeman, how ridiculous is that?
So, I did try to do a little bit of digging on this, and it was really interesting. I think there's two things. Like, one, the Blue Jays do check on everybody, right? As cliched as it sounds. And, you're not doing your job if you're not. And, the prevailing impression that I've got, in talking things over with a bunch of different people is that, Atlanta, he's still expected to go back to Atlanta, right? But if somebody's going to go further than what he wants, or where Atlanta is willing to go, then could the Blue Jays potentially do it? Like, yeah, it's uncomfortable for them because now you're locking two guys into first base and DH, and then you can't really rotate that. I think that the consensus that I've had is that they're ready to leave well enough alone with Vladdy at first and not throw him back to third base. I mean, he was just an MVP finalist. Why are you going to screw with that and put him at a more demanding defensive position on a full-time or at least semi-regular basis? But if the price just happened to make sense and Freddie Freeman really wanted to, that's a pretty intriguing piece, and you can definitely make that work. I mean, if you're going to make it work for everybody, for anybody, Freddie Freeman is certainly the type of hitter that you would make that arrangement for. The other piece that I do think, is in this is that if the Blue Jays are kicking around the idea of trying to extend Vladimir Guerrero Jr., which, I think would be a natural thing to be considering, especially with a little bit of extra downtime at this point. If you're trying to figure out how to frame what his free agent years look like, there haven't been a lot of recent comps, right? If you look back, the Paul Goldschmidt's extension with the Cardinals a couple of years back is sort of the most recent example, sort of an elite first baseman and pricing out some free agent years. But that's like in his late 30s or like 32 beyond. Freeman's obviously going to be in that range too. But if you're trying to frame what the back end of a Guerrero extension should look like, the Freddie Freeman's number is probably going to be a little bit relevant. So I wonder if there's some of that for the Blue Jays too, and sort of figuring out where that market is going, what the back end of a potential of a contract in those age years for a free agent first baseman, elite free agent first baseman looks like, and sort of that's how Freeman, that to me sort of is the sort of the 10,000 foot view of what that Freddie Freeman stuff was all about.
Right. I don't know, and for me it was, yeah, right. Come on, I know off seasons it's a time for crazy thinking, and what about but to me that was just a little bit too crazy for me to even fall in love with, even though I would love to see Freddie Freeman in that Blue Jays lineup. But I mean, like as you said. And somebody said to me, well, Freddie Freeman's a little bit older, and they've got a DH spot open and maybe it can work. But I have a hard time seeing that happen. We've got a couple more questions here for you, Shai, before we let you go.
Sure.
And one comes from Matt, loyal YouTube viewer, Matt Sweeby. He says, hey there, beautiful people. Lots of arbitration raises due after 2022 with only Stripling's $5 million coming off the books. How high do you think the 2023 budget is going to be? Which is very interesting because I was going to ask you about this year's budget in the context of free agency, but this coming season and the season after that, how high do you see the Blue Jays being one of the league's top spenders?
Well, okay. So, I mean, first off, it's a good question, Matt. And I've written about this a couple times that, the next year, if you're kind of looking out of the payroll commitments over the next few years, next year is the one that's tight because there is no significant money that's coming off the books, right? There's no, Stripling, but there's no major free agent beyond that. So depending on how their payroll plays out, if they're, I think they still have some, I have an exact number, obviously, but I've gotten the impression that they still have a decent sum to work with. Like, what's that? Is that 10 million? Is that 15 million? I can't say for certain, but it sounds like they still feel like they can get some things done and something of reasonable significance. And again, I'm not saying that means Freddie Freeman or anything like that, but I do think that they can still add some guys who can be factors. What it looks like in 23, I think that there's an understanding that this is next year, especially. Bo's going to be in his first year of arbitration. Vladdy's going to be in his second year of arbitration. Biggio's going to be second year. Jansen's going to be second year. There's a few others, a bunch of other players are going to be first time through. It's going to, a lot of the efficiency is going to start disappearing. And so I think next year, depending on how things play out, like, look, if the Blue Jays are able to play 81 home games and there are no restrictions on attendance and, hope against hope, we're in a more normal world and, businesses as well, the Blue Jays perform on the field, are able to generate revenue. I mean, that's gonna certainly have an impact on what 23 looks like as well. So I think, it's a good question. It's certainly one the Blue Jays are thinking about in everything that they do. But, again, we can't crystal ball that at this point, or at least I can't. I wish I could.
And Shai, I guess how much of the Rogers element plays into this? Because I'm sure you have heard it just as much as I have in the past. The complaint about Rogers being tight-walleted, and so on. And they are the second richest. I believe I just read the second richest ownership in Major League Baseball. How much leeway does the Blue Jays front office have with regard to payroll? Obviously, Rogers has to have some kind of oversight, but do they have kind of the green light to just get it done, or is there a more conservative approach from ownership?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, they've done their biggest few of their biggest contracts in team history through the pandemic, right? You've signed George Springer after a year in Buffalo with no fans, and then you have the Barrios extension, and then the Gausman contract. So you've got $300 million plus contracts through the pandemic. So if anything, the Blue Jays have never had this kind of support, and I think a big part of that is that Ed Rogers has been one of the more supportive people in the Rogers structure towards the Blue Jays. He's got a very good working relationship with Mark Shapiro, and I think that has helped work it. But Rogers does remain a publicly owned company, and anything that the Blue Jays do, there has to be a good business case for, right? They have to be able to justify that to their shareholders, which makes sense and is sort of understandable when you're a publicly owned company, or a publicly traded company, excuse me. And so for those reasons, I don't think that they'll ever just be able to say, start throwing money around and saying, no worries about the price here, we're all good.
Yeah.
But by the same token, I do think that Mark Shapiro has been able to demonstrate to Edward Rogers the validity of his plan, the opportunities that the Blue Jays have collectively. And I think we've seen it, just by the three contracts that I mentioned. But at a time where a lot of other clubs in baseball were cutting costs, the Blue Jays were able to push forward.
Right. And if anybody can convince an ownership group to spend money, I believe it's Mark Shapiro. Just his demeanor, his intelligence, and so on and so forth. His ability to pitch, I think, is underrated by some. Last question here, Shai. Catching depth, what do you see happening with it? And the kind of sub question to that is, when do we see Gabriel Moreno in 2022? Or at all?
It's really exciting with Gabriel Moreno. It's funny. I had a conversation with Gil Kim, Blue Jays player development head, towards the end of the season, and he was saying, like, in the beginning, before Moreno broke his thumb, he was putting up sort of Bo and Vladdy numbers. He was like, well, is the league going to be able to slow him down? He kept expecting it to happen, and then it wasn't happening. And then he didn't get a chance to see if the Double A East, or whatever it's called at this point, was going to be able to catch up to him and slow him down. And then because he was injured, and then when he came back, it was basically Arizona Fall League time, and he just totally steamrolled pitchers there too. I think the clock is going to be in him. Part of what's going to really need to happen for him to make it is he's going to have to continue to perform, but he's also going to need to have an opportunity, right? This isn't sort of the 2019 Blue Jays, when it's like, all right, Bo and Vladdy, just when you're ready, just come on up, and we'll clear space for you, right? This is a team that's here to win, and that's expecting to win, and anyone who's jumping in has to hit the ground running. There's no sort of time for development here. So I think that's impacting Moreno's timeline a little bit, or it'll be a factor in Moreno's timeline. From the catching depth perspective, this is a super intriguing opportunity for the Blue Jays, right? Because I've long been a Danny Jansen fan. I think that Danny Jansen has a lot more value just beyond what he's hitting, and I think that we've seen some of that importance play out just with the way that the Blue Jays performed at the end of the season. I think he was a part of that in terms of what he did behind the plate. Alejandro Kirk is super, super interesting. About as talented a bat to ball player as you're going to find. Someone who can be a really significant contributor if given the opportunity. But I also think that he's one of their better trade pieces right now. And, if the right deal comes along, if he's what you have to part with to get say a Jose Ramirez, I think this is sort of the time to sort of cash that in, because you do have Moreno coming. Jansen and Reese McGuire are certainly capable. You could certainly try to find, a backup, veteran backup to partner with Jansen if you're not comfortable with Reese McGuire as your secondary option. Sort of this is the time, if you're going to make a splash, and sort of that's an area of depth the Blue Jays could part with. The Blue Jays could also move an outfielder. That's another area of depth they can move. But, I think the Blue Jays catchers were getting some interest throughout the offseason. We know it's not the best market for catchers. And so, if we do see a trade, I would not be surprised at all if it involves a catcher.
Now we've gone a really long time, Shi, and I apologize for that. But you just mentioned trading an outfielder, and I have to ask you then: is there a scenario where Randall Grichuk does not play for the Toronto Blue Jays next season, given his woeful on-base percentage and so on and so on and so on? Because there's power there, there's defensive value. So is there a scenario where he can be traded? And if so, can the Blue Jays turn that into something of value?
Well, I'm going to start off my answer and just kind of play sort of devil's advocate a little bit, and just say, I know people get down on Randall Grichuk, but, he was a really important player for the team last year in April and May when George Springer wasn't there, and his contributions, he helped paper them through a tough stretch. And that, it's important to kind of keep in mind that over the course of a season, there are times where you're going to need players to step up and deliver certain things. And, the Blue Jays were able to cover through Randall's dry streak. But when he was performing in the beginning part of the season, it was very important contribution. So I just thought I'd mention that to start. I do think there's an opportunity to trade him. My understanding is that there was some interest in him at the deadline, or there's an opportunity for them to move him at the deadline, and it didn't happen. I think that if the Blue Jays do end up moving him, they're going to have to take back probably a player that with some money on his contract back from another team that is sort of my piece that is a bit redundant for your piece that's a bit redundant, or something along those lines. But I don't think that it's a guarantee, but I do think it's something that they would look at, because the Blue Jays do have essentially three everyday outfielders in Gurriel, Hernandez, and Springer. And if Randall Grichuk can potentially be a bit more than a fourth outfielder, but if you're going to carry a fourth outfielder, in an ideal world, he bats left-handed, right? So he gives you something that the other guys don't. You probably need to be able to play some center field as well, though you could move Teoscar over to center to cover for Springer with some days off. But I think for those reasons, looking to move Grichuk would make some sense. And but I don't think that you're moving Grichuk in a prospect deal. It's probably my contract that doesn't fit quite as perfectly for your contract that doesn't fit quite as perfectly.
Right. Fair enough. All right, Shi, one last thing here. We've got a comment here in from Butch again. He wants to thank you for taking his question, and now he gets to brag at the bar that he got to talk with Shi Davidi. So thank you for making his night and mine.
No problem. I'm not sure how much cachet that's going to get you at the bar, but here in Ontario right now, we're probably a little bit envious of you being able to go to a bar at all. So
exactly, and don't sell yourself short. The folks down in North Tonawanda, they love their Blue Jays and their Bisons. So this is awesome for them. Shi, I want to again thank you for giving your time so graciously. You're always good to us here at Jays from the Couch, and I appreciate that. I want to give you the opportunity to plug your book and all of that. So I'm just going to let everybody know what the Big 50 is all about.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Back in at the end of the 2015 season, I wrote the first version of the Blue Jays Big 50, and it's essentially looking at 50 of the most important people, moments, contributions, achievements, things of that nature in Blue Jays history. And I revised that after the 2020 season came out in May 21, I believe. And I wrote about 30,000 new words for the update. Which was a lot. I believe the original version was about 85,000 words, but it was mostly concentrated in a few chapters. Wrote a new chapter about Jose Bautista, a new chapter about Mark Shapiro, and a few other things. Updated a chapter and expanded a chapter on Edwin Encarnacion, and so it was a really fun project. It was I'd still like to have another go at it at some point. There's a couple things that I still haven't included that I'd like to find a way to include in there. But I do think it was a really fun book, and a lot of people bought the first one, very appreciative of that, and a lot of people have bought the second one so far too, which is really nice.
And who knows, by the time you sit down to do the next revision, there may even be a division title this coming season or even a championship in the next couple of years. So you'll have lots more to write about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that definitely one addition if there is a third version would definitely revolve around Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette. And I feel like I don't have enough on the 89 and 91 division championships in the book, so I'd like to sort of update that as well, but that's for the future.
That's right. It's a lot of work, and I wish you all the best, Shi. Thank you so much for doing this again, and you know what, enjoy the rest of the lockout. Hopefully it doesn't last too long, but and we'll talk again soon.
I appreciate you having me, Shaun, and appreciate the work that you guys do, and definitely appreciate you guys having me here.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Be well.
That was Shi Davidi, baseball insider and Sportsnet columnist, author of The Big 50, the Toronto Blue Jays, joining us for episode 284 of the Jays from the Couch radio podcast. Make sure you catch all of our live streams here Mondays, the podcast, Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern time. You got the On Feck Circle Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern time, hosted by Steve Feck, and Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern time is The Sunny Side of the Dome, hosted by Karen Suter. We've got lots of Blue Jays coverage for you. Check us out. So for Shi Davidi, for Karen, for Steve, this is Shaun Doyle. You can follow me on Twitter at DoyleJFtC. Hoping life gives you a juicy fastball down the middle and you don't miss